call the Saline City Council special meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. If you'd rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we are recording tonight's meeting. I do want to begin by thanking everyone for adjusting their schedules and being with us. I do have to announce that we're going to try and keep this to just about an hour because I know at least two of us need to leave promptly at 7:30 to get to other appointments. Mr. Gearbaugh did have an opportunity to speak to Bond Counsel Roger Sweats and City Manager Campbell regarding this issue. He may or may not attend this evening, so we will entertain a motion to excuse his absence in the event he does not arrive until the end of the meeting this evening. So members present are myself, Mayor Marl, Council members Seo, McClellan, Mitchell, Dillon, and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, and City Attorney Sweats. At this time, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
So moved.
As submitted, Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, submitted.
And seconded by Mr. Seo, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hearing no discussion on the motion, all those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We'll proceed then to citizen comments on agenda items under the Open Meetings Act. Any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? There are no citizen comments. Then we'll proceed to new business. Item 18-119, Charter Amendment Process and Resolution to Approve. Mr. Campbell, do you have any remarks at this time, or would you like to turn it over to Mr. Sweats?
I think Roger.
Roger, we welcome you here this evening. Can you be sure to speak into the microphone, and perhaps you can comment on the resolution that your office prepared, and then we'll open it up for questions. Ma'am, make sure the green light's on at the base of the microphone.
Yeah, it's on. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's nice to be with you tonight. Very nice day for a little drive in the car over from Grand Rapids. So we've been in discussion with the city for some time about various options for how to deal with the street improvements and so forth. And knowing that the decision has been made that you would like to seek approval to get a special dedicated 1 mil levy to pay for these improvements, that then raises the question of how exactly do we get that done? And as is often the case with municipal law, things aren't as absolutely simple as what maybe we would hope they would be, in the thought that we could just put out a simple ballot proposal and say, you know, can we raise the 1 mil for so many years? Yes, no, and let's go from there. Cities are what we call charter entities. Not all types of municipalities are, but a city, pursuant to the Home Rule Cities Act, has a charter, which in some respect kind of acts like a constitution for the city. It sets out the overall governing structure, rights, responsibilities, limits on power, and so forth that a city is subject to. For instance, that's different than a township, which does not have a charter. Even charter townships don't have a charter. They have a statute that does provide some charter-like functions, but general law townships don't have a charter at all. Counties don't have a charter, except for a few very large counties in the state that are organized as charter counties. So, but cities do have charters, and one of the things that your charter covers, which is a required charter provision pursuant to the Home Rule Cities Act, is it has a limitation on the number of mills that are allowed to be levied in the city. And that limitation is found in section 10.2 of the city charter, which is it's kind of an interesting place to put it. It's a little bit unusual place to put it, but it puts it right behind what the charter says about the ability to issue bonds. And that section says the issuance and sale of bonds and other obligations, the limit of bonded indebtedness of the city, and the limitation on the borrowing and anticipation of taxes or delinquent taxes shall be governed by state law. So much for that. But then it goes on to say, and the limit of taxation for municipal purposes shall be 1 1/2% of the assessed value of all real and personal property in the city. And that 1 1/2% language translated into millages means that the city can levy 15 mills. That's your general charter millage, and I believe, I'll look for Mickey Jo to nod her head, I believe the city's levying its full, no. Okay. Okay, so there is a little bit of capacity under that general limitation, but that's your general ability to levy tax. You don't need to ask for permission to levy that. That's the taxing ability that by charter is already available to the city. So if you want to go out and ask for the ability to levy a property tax beyond that 15 mills, we have to deal with this section 10.2 from the city charter. And so what we've done in preparing the resolution that you have before you is we've prepared a possible amendment to the city charter, and this resolution combines two things. One, both approving the language of the proposed amendment, and then secondly, approving what the ballot question would be if this charter amendment would actually move forward and go to the electorate. So the process is for the city council to both approve the charter amendment and the ballot proposal. Then once you do that, that has to be sent to both the governor's office and to the attorney general's office, where they have to review and sign off and approve the charter amendment. That's fairly routine. We've done this many times. Historically, the governor's office pretty much just signs off if the AG signs off, and there's a gentleman in the AG's office who's kind of a specialist in city charters, and so he sometimes has some questions, and we may have a few little tweaks here and there, although the language that we've used here is similar to language that's been approved for other cities that have gone through this process. So that's the process. If we turn to the resolution and look specifically at what I've laid out here for this charter amendment, we can kind of go through this. And what I've done is kind of laid out one way that you can do this. I certainly don't mean to say that we absolutely have to do what I'm saying here. I've kind of tried to take a route that would give the city the most flexibility going forward in the future, but there may be some other thoughts as to how we do it. But the actual charter language is found on the first page of the resolution in paragraph 1, where it says, the city council, by a 3/5 vote of its members, proposes that section 10.3 be added to the city charter to read as follows. And that's an important point. This does need to be approved by a 3/5 vote of council. So, you know, I think the hope here is that, you know, the city wouldn't go forward unless it's unanimous, but it does legally require a 3/5 vote. And so then in the charter question itself, we say the limitation on taxation provided in 10.2, which we just read, may be increased in such amount for such period and for such purposes as may be approved by a majority of the electors of the city voting on the question at the election at which the proposition to do so shall be submitted. But the increase in any case shall not be such as to cause such rate to exceed the maximum amount permitted by law. So I want to stop there and kind of split this into two pieces. The maximum amount of mills that the city can levy is 20. So basically, the city has 5 mills of possible property taxation that it's not using with its current version of the charter. So by using this language in the first half of the charter amendment here, what it would do is it would allow the use of those legally available mills if there was a ballot proposal for a certain set number of those available mills presented to the electors and approved by the electorate. So what I'm saying there is that while in this time we've got to go through this charter amendment process to get this done, if we use this first half of the amendment in what we proceed with, for future available millages for the city, you wouldn't have to go through this whole charter amendment process again. You would simply be able to approve a ballot proposal and submit that to the electors, which is what I think from comments I've heard some people wished you would just have been able to do in this case. So the first half of the amendment is meant to make this more flexible in the future and allow that to just be presented to the voters in the future to the extent you're within that 20 mil statutory cap that you can't go over. I should mention there are a few statutory millages outside of the Home Rule Cities Act and outside of your charter, that you are allowed to levy without all this stuff. And if you were doing those would be on top of the 20 mils. But I'll just mention that in case you hear something like that in a different city. But in your case now, we're just focusing, on the charter millage. So that's really, I really want to draw attention to that first half of the question to you, because you don't have to say that in this question. I think, and I don't know, Todd, I think I probably would want to maybe convey at least the thought that Councilmember Gerbach had expressed. He had a little bit of concern that if we use this first half of the question, somebody could misconstrue that to saying we're authorizing a 5 mil levy, and would that confuse the voters, and would that prejudice the question? Now, you're not. We're going to get to what you're actually doing for this current situation in the second half of the question. But in the first half of the charter amendment, the question is do you want flexibility in the future to not have to go through this whole charter amendment process again? Or is that a little bit concerning that you think that might be misconstrued by the voters as approving too much in this question? So then if we go to the second half of the question, started with the provided however, the second half of the charter amendment, it says, provided however, the annual ad valorem tax levy shall be increased by 1/10 of 1% of the assessed valuation as equalized of all real and personal property subject to taxation in the city for a period of 5 years from 2019 through 2023 to pay the costs of designing, financing, acquiring, paving, repaving, repairing, widening, and improving rights-of-way within the city, including streets, sidewalks, bicycle paths, traffic signalization, curbs, gutters, proper drainage facilities, therefore, and ramps, together with all signage, lighting, and appurtenances. And we can tweak any of that however you might, but the basic substance of that there is that while the first half of the charter amendment will allow future ballot proposals, the second half is saying specifically, by the adoption of this charter amendment for a 5-year period, you'll levy 1 mil for street improvements, just to simplify what we said there. So that's really the gist of it. The first half is giving flexibility for the future. The second half is this particular question. Now, if you're worried about that first half of the charter amendment, one, we could just delete that and have this just be a specific authorization of a millage for 5 years. The comment I think that came to me when this was first communicated to me is that you at least want the ability to renew that millage. So we probably wouldn't just delete the first half and just have the second half. If you do want the ability to renew the millage, we might make the first half limited to 1 mil like the second half is limited to 1 mil, so that could be revoted for these purposes in the future. But that's really, I think, kind of the first question is, do you want the flexibility for the full amount of legal charter millage that would be available, or do we want to tighten this up so that that's not misconstrued? And if we tighten it up, how much do we want to tighten it? Just this 5 mils one time, or do we want to do, or this 1 mil for 5 years one time, or do we want to, leave in at least, the ability to kind of keep revoting this into the future as often as the electors might want to do that?
Anything else, Mr. Swets?
I think I'd probably stop there and get some input from council at this point. I would point out that after we get through this, we also do have the actual question that would go to the electors on the next page, but we can kind of, I think this is really the more important point to kind of get through first.
Okay, well, let's stick with that then. Let me begin, and then I'll open it up for questions. Mr. Campbell and I had a brief discussion as a follow-up to your conversation with Mr. Gearbaugh, Councilmember Gearbaugh, excuse me, and as it relates to the 20 mils, the statutory 20 mils, I actually tend to agree with Councilmember Gearbaugh. I think that flexibility is important, but I think optics are more important. And my experience with ballot proposals is the more convoluted and difficult they are to understand, the less apt the electorate is to favor their approval. And at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is approval so we can move forward and complete some very important quality of life infrastructure projects. So while I understand your perspective and I agree with it, and I value flexibility, I think the optics are more important. So I would be inclined to change that. That's not so much a question as it is a statement. But let's open it up for questions, and if you have commentary, you're welcome to provide that as well. Mayor Pro Tem Hart, can I start with you? I'll work my way down to Mr. CEO and then jump back and grab Councilwoman McClellan and Mitchell.
Okay, thank you. So, it's good to have the explanation, because when I read this and reread it and read it again, legal language not being my native language, I did not understand that the two parts were doing two separate things. And so my inclination is to agree with the mayor's point that that we might consider simplifying. I agree with also with the idea that people are put off by ballot proposals that they can't understand. And we can explain all we want, but if we can simplify this, I think that would be better. Just to clarify, when you say renew, so this, in the second part, when you say building in the option of renewing the millage, that would be a renewal by another vote by the voters, not us, right?
Right.
Right, okay. I was pretty sure about that, but just to clarify. So that's, yeah,
Good for now?
yeah.
Okay. Councilwoman Dillon?
Well, I've got a lot of just general questions that I'd like to sort of touch upon. Some of the language, I wasn't sure, there's a lot of language in here. We start talking very generally. It now includes sidewalks and bike paths and traffic signalizations and curbs and gutters and drainage and ramps and lighting and signage. When we discussed this during our meeting, it was my assumption we were talking pavement, just pavement. And so I'm very concerned that we're selling it as one thing, and these funds may get diverted into other directions. And so I'm not really comfortable with the language that it is right now, if that's the intent of this millage. I was hoping Mr. Fordyce was going to be here this evening and could touch base about that and why we're including this, why it's so broad.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
So these are all typical costs of your most of our street projects, of a typical street project. So whether it's sidewalk, whether it's the drainage is referring to the storm drains, those, especially any significant project, have all those components listed. And so this money, because we don't have any, right, I mean, that's a struggle, right? We don't have the money overall to design these projects, let alone build them. So these costs are associated with what I would call a typical project, because there are oftentimes you may have to do some work at the intersections with the sidewalks, for instance, if for ADA improvements and those types of things. Now, not all of these costs, they may or may not be involved. It just allows us the ability to, if that component needs to be done in that project, that the millage dollars would be able to be utilized for that project.
Okay. I understand that. I don't feel as though the language is clear in here. It seems to me that these are separate points, that they're not encompassing of a project. And so I want to make sure that we're very clear that this funding is not going to go build a bike path that's not associated with a road. I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Roger, to Councilwoman Dillon's point, is there a way to tighten up that language using some legal ease and diction that's likely to be approved or signed off on by the AG and the governor's office that would alleviate that concern?
Yeah, I think actually bike paths, I think was something I stuck in there, so I'll take responsibility for that. But I think the rest of it was just, kind of a list that was provided to me by the city. So, frankly, we could probably say cost of designing, financing, acquiring, paving, repaving. Is widening a possibility, or are you just, yeah, widening, okay. So we could kind of leave that list there. And we could even, we could make it probably pretty close to simple as saying improving rights of way and streets within the city, and stop there. I think it all just depends on, bike paths we can certainly, I think, probably just delete. The rest of it, I think, just all depends on how much certainty you want that the specific components of a street project are included vis-a-vis, having the line just be a little bit narrower. What happens post charter amendment and what we face from time to time is a question from a client, from a city that says, well, this is what our millage says, can we spend this on X, Y, or Z? And when we look at that, then we'll look at the language specifically and say, well, is that in there or is that not? It's not always perfectly clear. So for instance, one of the things the city asked for was, or what was in the email that came to me, was some reference to ramps. I'm not sure what ramps were. If ramps is not in here, and that question came to me, can we finance ramps? I would probably say it's probably not part of a street, but I don't know exactly what you had in mind as far as ramps.
If I could, so just to specify, to be more specific on that, oftentimes when we're doing work on a street in an intersection, we take that opportunity to correct those, essentially update the ADA ramp requirements, that type of thing.
So are you just simply talking like the graduated curb cut, or are you talking some kind of a bigger ramp?
No, the sidewalk, right? The sidewalk ramp says to get onto a sidewalk.
Okay.
At an intersection.
Okay.
Sometimes you got to change the grades on those and redo them to comply with ADA requirements.
Okay. So, if you make this language narrow, some of the things here I would have doubts about. A sidewalk is not a street, so that would be a little bit of a stretch to say that, if we narrow it just to streets, whether sidewalks would be included. Traffic signalization, that's probably, I don't know, that's related to a street, but it's not perfectly clear. Curbs and gutters, I probably would say is okay. Drainage facilities is kind of a 50-50. Signage and lighting, probably not. I think the question, and keep in mind, this is what the charter amendment's going to say. This is not going to be what the ballot proposals will be. We do make it simpler in the ballot proposal. But I guess what I would say is if there's anything in that laundry list that you see that you don't want this money spent for, let's take it out. But if it's something you think you might spend the money for, then it probably doesn't hurt to leave it in.
I think, just for clarification, my concern is that, absent the bike path wording, the other things, if they're associated with a street project, I guess I don't see issue with it, but it's not clearly stating that it's in conjunction with a project. So the way that I'm reading this, it just sort of it's including streets and sidewalks. They're all separate.
Well,
So
everything there is being given as a subset of improving rights of way within the city. So it has to be an improvement to a right-of-way. I use the term right-of-way because a street is a very specific thing. Right-of-way, gives you the flexibility to move out into the sidewalk. I don't know if you would have public alleys that would need to be improved, but a right-of-way could include a public alley. So I did use a little bit broader term than just street by using right-of-way, but everything that follows has to relate back to that. So this wouldn't, for instance, let us go and build a new sidewalk somewhere in a city park.
Okay, so that's very clear, because from the wording, it doesn't seem that, and I don't want people to be confused by it. And I want to make sure that I clearly understand what it is that I'm voting for. So if that's what you're saying, the language states now, then I think I'm okay with it. Like I said, it just seems, I would rather see something in there that says that these projects are associated to.
We could change that to say something like in improving streets and related rights-of-way, so that it would have to be a right-of-way directly involved in a street. That would prevent, then you would not do an alley-type improvement project. But streets and related right-of-ways would still fairly broad.
Roger, what about this? And again, you're the attorney, so if this is inappropriate, just chime in. But, so I'm on the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth whereas. 1 mil for a period of 5 years for designing, financing, acquiring, paving, repaving, repairing, widening, and improving right-of-ways within the city, including as part of a street project, sidewalks, bike paths, so on and so forth.
I would be fine with that if that answered all the questions that the council has.
I think so.
Does that provide the context you're looking
I
for?
think so. Like I said, I just want to make sure that it's related back to an actual project. It's not independent, isolated things.
The key point that we did specifically talk about at the work meeting was the storm drains and because I know Councilmember Gearboss said, but the storm drains is not out of the, because the utilities underneath the ground were coming from water and sewer. We talked about how that would come from the utility rates, but those improvements like storm drains would come from the general fund. So we wanted to make sure that we left the language broad enough that we could include those things. So we weren't now tapping into the general fund for money that we didn't have. So that's specifically why we wanted to make sure we had broadened the language, that anything that related to that steep project that isn't coming out of the street paving would come, that we could also cover it. And I specifically remember them saying the storm drains, because then Dean's, well, then that would come out of our general fund if we didn't have the proper language.
Right. Okay. Okay, thank you. My next question is there a reason why we're not just using the 1.5 mils that we currently have available?
Well, this would be that's room for, typically speaking, for your ongoing operations. And it has also, quite frankly, being used, even though we have the voted millage to pay the bonds, or I should say voted bond. We voted bonds, so we could, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but we could actually, the council could assess that millage because it was voted for those bonds that we currently have, but currently it's coming out of the general fund, out of the ad valorem taxes. So typically speaking, for something like this, it would be separate and dedicated, because that also gives you some room if absolutely necessary, you need something for further operations.
I'm sorry, I totally don't understand that. Can you do that one more time? I'm so-
Probably not. So, but I'll try. So, oftentimes you see it for something like a street millage is dedicated. So it's a dedicated source of revenue for specific to streets, for instance, versus taking that out of your operating millage, because you always try and protect that operating millage for whatever for anything, typically the general fund that needs to come out of those general fund dollars. And so that would, well, you could, you can use general fund dollars for most anything provided by government services. But correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but so we could do that.
So we're just sort of saving that one for a rainy day crisis situation?
Well, that's a policy decision, of course, but certainly by council, but And again, potentially to be voted, but either way, yeah, that's more that your traditional operational, for the services that we provide, whether it be, police, fire, assessing, parks, et cetera.
Okay.
If that makes, maybe that's a little bit clearer, I apologize
Yeah,
for.
no, thank you. Okay. I know there's a lot of other people with questions. I'm sorry, I'm just unclear about a few things that I just want to make sure. When I look back at my notes, and we talked about when the mayor had provided us with kind of the funding for 800,000. So that brings us 100,000 shy of Mr. Fordyce's $900,000 threshold. Is that the number that we're working with? Are we trying to have 900,000? Are we using that spreadsheet?
Well,
Because I'm just trying to make sure that I'm looking at apples to apples. So,
Understand with that? I can only speak from my perspective and why I decided to ultimately recommend what I did at the last council work meeting. One, I think 1 mil, the amount of revenue it generates, is something that our taxpayers can live with. And using those funds with county dollars, with Act 51 dollars, and miscellaneous grants, it gets us close to the number that Mr. Fordyce threw off. I don't have that paperwork in front of me, but it's around 900,000.
right, yes.
Gets us close to that level, which would allow us to improve the network of roads within our city over the course of the ensuing years. While it would be great to substantially improve our roads and streets over the next 5 to 10 years, I don't feel that it's realistic to ask our voters to endure an additional 2 mil on their summer tax bill.
Okay, so then, if I'm hearing you correctly, we are not striving for the improved status of 900,000.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we are, or yes, I am correct?
Again, I can only speak for myself, but my goal, and the reason why I made the recommendation I made, was to get us close to that dollar amount.
Okay, so that, I think you and I are saying the same. I just want to make sure. So is 800,000 the number that we're looking, this will be the amount? Or are we going to also take general fund dollars? And
I'm not recommending, nor have I ever recommended utilizing general fund dollars to meet our infrastructure needs, specifically road projects. I'm talking about utilizing 1 mil.
yes,
With Act 51 dollars,
yes,
with county road dollars, miscellaneous grants, and similar to what we did this year, we can always, per policy, utilize dollars that exceed the 20% fund balance that we're essentially obligated to maintain as part of a policy that was adopted 5 years ago.
okay, so
The
Once
800 was
again,
close too. It wasn't exactly.
are we, so we're not going to hit the $900,000 mark for cash dollars? If we can get grants, we're looking at having 807,000, I think is
Yeah,
sort of where the
we're a
the
little
math
short
was.
of the number that
Right.
he threw out.
Okay, where does that put us in Mr. Fordyce's charts? Does that, I mean, are we still going to be at an improved state? I guess that was, and how long does that maintain out? Because we didn't see that number. I guess, I just thought that we were going to be backfilling somewhere, and that's what I was trying to clarify, where we're coming from to get to this.
For 5 years.
Pardon?
We'll be about here for 5 years.
No, we're going to be 100,000 short on that.
Well, they're hoping to make that up, I think, through the Act 51.
No, the Act
or other
51
grants and
is
so on.
everything else. Other grant possibilities,
Your taxable value, which your millage is based on, is going to grow each year by growth, new housing
Okay,
So it's part of the factor that will continue to grow.
okay,
And then in addition, like Jeff stated at the work meeting, we will be able to apply for different grants and things like that to offset the differences. And the amount that we use for that we very randomly threw out there was the amount that this fiscal year was allocated, and close to the last couple fiscal years, that was specifically allocated to road constructions, taking out the Act 51 money that we use for maintenance and stuff like that. So each given year, that number's gonna vary. So to hang our hat on that 900,000, we could get there, some years we may be over if we want to get the full mill, which is why we're gonna do this as part of the budget process each year. But and then some years we may be a little short if there's a heavy snowfall and we need more Act 51 money for that. The number that we randomly threw out there was based on this fiscal year's budget, and I don't want to say that we're randomly doing it, based on this fiscal year's budget, that's how much Act 51 money was being allocated for road construction. So that's the calculation that we use.
okay.
So we're getting very close to that, and that number can change every year to get us that close to that 900,000.
Okay.
And historically, it has been about a third of the Act 51 dollars. So, and then I would also say that typically the grants we get are in the realm of, $200,000 to $400,000 plus or minus. So, I mean, those are usually pretty solid grants that we're able to receive.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, I just wanted to make sure we weren't starting in a hole, that we were going to have to fund some other source.
You have to keep in mind as well that what Jeff pointed out, when we talked to Roger about when we actually can collect this money, once we get that money collected and then we start doing the improvements, there's gonna be about a year lag. So there'll be, we've been collecting that money. If this was to pass and we collected it next July, we wouldn't start the project till possibly the following year by the time you got the design and all of that done. So you could possibly still hit that 900,000 with extra money from the next fiscal year.
Okay. That was going to be my next question, was the timing issue.
Building it up as we go, because we can't design these projects until we have a source of income.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop there because I know there's a lot of people that want to ask some questions. I've got some more down the road as we get into the second page.
Mr. Seal?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to tell you that I'm going to get about and depart the room at 20 after 7 because I have a meeting that was originally scheduled at 7 o'clock that I deferred till 7:30 at my house that I am chairing. So if I get up and leave at 20 after, I hope you don't regard it as being rude, but I have other obligations as well. So back to the original question that the mayor posed. I think the government has probably rightly earned the skepticism of the voting public. I think that people regard anything, especially the chess game, or the shell game, I guess, that I meant to say, that the state tried to pull with the last road millage that they proposed, made people so confused and skeptical. I'd be surprised that they voted for any multi-part question anymore. And I understand that sentiment. I mean, we've earned it. Maybe not this particular council, maybe not the people at this dais, but government has earned the bad reputation that we carry. And this is not at all clear at the first reading, I don't think, that we're doing two parts here. So, not to criticize you either, Roger, but I guess I am in league with Mrs. Terhar and with the mayor that I think we need to keep this as simplistic as we possibly can so that the voting public doesn't think we're trying to pull a double whammy on them. They don't think that we're asking for only 1 mil and yet then some, excuse me, sir, but some ambitious press reporters say, oh yeah, but they can go up to 5 mils more. And that's the gotcha, because it's not a gotcha. It's just asking for the capacity. So I think we're better off to keep it as straightforward as possible, to ask for the 1 mil that we're trying to achieve here for roads only. And I don't have any problem including all these other appurtenances of descriptions so we don't get stuck later unless somebody's saying, wait a minute, this shouldn't include storm sewers, when in fact you can't build the road without a storm sewer, especially a new road. Or you can't add the 4 feet of pavement for a bike path within the roadway like we've been doing, because it doesn't say bike path, it says roads. So I like your list. I like the way you've tried to explain this as being part of the right-of-way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Councilwoman McClellan.
Yeah, I don't have very much more to say than what Mr. Seo just said, because I agree. I think we need to tighten up the language a little bit, make it clear that we're not asking for the opportunity to go to 20 mills, and just ask for what we need. We need money for roads, we need 1 mill, and let it be something that we can renew when we need to, and I think that's pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned, and I think I have no issues with the list that you have already there, especially since it doesn't, that list isn't on what's going to the electors. So I think keep ourselves open for that portion of it so that there is the opportunity to use it for other infrastructure like drains and sidewalks and stuff like that, because otherwise we're going to have to find that money later on at some point if we don't do it now. So, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, sir. So on a language point, I'm so glad, Mr. Swets, that you went through that, because I had a completely different leg of the horse before walking into this council chambers, and you really helped clarify. I do pretty well with law issues, and I think that speaks to we need simple language. So 8th grade level language. So when we're looking at the part, I guess it was part 1 that you referred to, the increase in any case shall not be such as cause to such rate to exceed the maximum amount permitted by law. That to me is less specific than I would like it. What law? So for me, saying state law there is just more clear. And upon reading this, it wasn't clear to me that we were looking at the flexibility, and that was a question I had before coming tonight was, do we want the flexibility of asking up to 5? Would it simplify things down the road? And we don't know where cost of materials are going to be in 5 years. We don't know, or 4 years before this runs out. And I'm torn. I don't think I have a strong opinion either way, whether we go with, we want just the 1 mill. So we're going to go through this again. That's our time and money paying for an attorney. Or do we go ahead and just, say the maximum amount permitted by state law, and just say right now our charter doesn't match state law. That's just, those are the facts. And then make very clear, this time it's a very narrow, we're dedicating it just for streets. I'm so happy that Ms. Dillon raised that point about the materials, the sidewalks and bicycle paths, because that wasn't clear to me that these were associated costs. I was thinking, well, can we just pay for a random sidewalk out of, if this passes? It looks like, to me, it looks like we could just pay for a sidewalk, but I think if we want voters to consider this, it has to be indeed dedicated and narrow, and we can say, honestly, this is just for roads and road improvements. What is the term? Rights of way and their associated costs. I'm just going to double check my notes. I do have the numbers, if anyone is curious. I do have the numbers that the mayor discussed at our last work meeting, and I don't know if people need that, if that's helpful, or you don't need it. But I'll stop there.
So let me say a couple things. It appears that there is a majority of council who would like to see some modified language, Roger, at the beginning of the resolution regarding the issue of the 20 statutory mills. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, if maybe I could jump in. What I'm hearing is we only want 1 mill, and we only want it for streets, given the little list of what's included in a street. So I would pretty much take away the first half of the charter amendment, or at least would condense it down, I think, into about half of what it is, so that it's only 1 mill, only for the streets and related costs, and it could be renewed, but only for that purpose by future votes in the future. I think if we do that, we don't really need to refer to the limits of state law or 20 mills, because we're taking that completely off the table, and we're just very focusing in on just this, and then we'll just say, you know, if we want to do something different in the future, we'll just go back through this process and do a new charter amendment for whatever it is we might want to do that's different in the future. That's perfectly fine. I'm not advocating one way or the other. So that's what I'm hearing, and we can definitely, I think, achieve that in the language for you. The one thing I didn't quite get a consensus on is in the laundry list, do we want to leave bike paths in, or do we want to take them out?
Well, I had proposed that some additional language.
Right, yes, I'm sorry. I do have your additional language, and I will repeat not only that in the whereas paragraph, but in the charter amendment paragraph itself. And so, yes, with your proposed language, which I do have, that would mean that the bike path had to be as part of a street project.
Correct. And I think that would clarify everyone's concerns. Is that correct, Mr. CO?
Yes, the other question I had then is, Roger, would we then be allowed to levy 16 mills or only 15? In other words, would we still have the excess capacity that I hear the city manager asking that he'd like to have we'd have 16?
You would have 15 for any purpose, plus an
1 mill
additional
additional.
one only for roads.
Very good.
Ms. Mitchell?
And then I just want to ask, as long as we're discussing language in that laundry list of associated infrastructure along with the street, rather than using the word ramps, I think, Mr. Sweats, you referred to graduated curb cuts. I think you used that phrase. Was ramps unclear? You were saying, I don't know what you mean by ramps.
Yeah, not having been part of your discussions, I just received the list from the city, so I didn't know exactly what a ramp was.
Right. Is that closer to the?
We could say accessible sidewalks or
Accessible curbs.
accessible curbs.
Something.
Accessible has a good connotation.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
Accessible sidewalks probably would
Yep.
be.
That's good
More
terminology.
appropriate.
I want to jump back just momentarily to some comments that Councilwoman Mitchell made. You know, to reiterate a previous point, I don't disagree about the value of flexibility as it relates to the language that we are likely to amend in the first section of this resolution. But again, having worked on ballot proposals, and boy, that goes back more than a decade, I find that simplicity and optics and a very clear and concise narrative is critically important. And when that is absent, people become bewildered and frustrated, and they tend to vote no. And I understand that. While I might not agree, I can respect that. So I think that the consensus of council to modify that language is appropriate. Okay. So, Roger, Mr. Seal's going to have to exit in just a few moments. I need to leave in about 10 minutes. So it looks like we have consensus on how to modify language in that first section. So it would be my recommendation, unless you find this too onerous, and I hope you do not, because we are dealing with some timing issues here, that we can have a revised copy to review and consider at our next regular council meeting on Monday.
Right, yeah, I do have a meeting in the morning, so I should be able to do this when I get back to the office late morning or early afternoon and get something out by email by the end of the day tomorrow.
Very good. And then before several of us have to exit, did you want to touch briefly on the merits and the specifics of the proposal that we are considering putting on the ballot in November?
Yeah, so the proposal itself that would go on the ballot is the first few little paragraphs up to where it says number 3 on the second page. Some of this is legally required disclosure language. So, the gist of it is shall section 10.3 be added to the charter to provide, the millage power. This will be simplified, consistent with the changes that we've already talked about on the first page. So if you want to take a second and read through some of that, there is a blank there that would be filled in with the amount that would be generated in the first year, which is estimated at $434,743. And then there's also a disclosure that some of the funds could be subject to capture by the tax increment authorities.
And again, just for the council's benefit and for the public who may be watching, the resolution was drafted to include some of the specifics that I articulated at our last council meeting. So the 1 mil figure for a 5-year period. And again, that's my preference. That may or may not be the prerogative of the majority of city council.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I do want to hear insight and perspective on that. Again, let's, actually, Mr. Seal, can I start with you since you have to leave? Do you have any additional comments at this
I
time?
don't have any.
Okay. Ms. Dillon?
I had a question. First, we were missing a 1 and a 2 on that. Is there, like, they're not numbered? Oh, they're from the first page over?
Continuing from the first page, yeah.
So this isn't a separate document? I guess I'm,
Section 1 of your resolution approves the language for the charter amendment.
Right.
Section 2 approves the language for the ballot proposal, and then sections 3 through 7 just have some technical directions to staff and so forth.
okay. So then on the proposed amendment page, it would be the 3rd paragraph.
So from the top of page 2 down to where section 3 starts, that's what would go on the ballot.
Okay. So then in the 3rd paragraph, where the blank currently is, after the blank, it says, in the city, for the city to spend in 2019 for right-of-way repairs. Are we actually spending this? Do we have to say that?
We can delete in 2019.
Okay.
That's not necessary.
Is there, well, that was, I guess, the second part is there a time frame in which we have to spend this money?
No.
Okay.
No,
There's just, we can.
The city always has the power to levy millage and then save it in fund balance until it has enough to do a project. So, if it took 2 years to get enough to do for a project to be feasible, that would be fine. If it took 5, you could do that. I think,
Okay.
at some point, there would be political pressure if you're levying millage and not spending it. But
Okay. That's what I guess I was trying to get at, was do we have to put that it would be spent by?
yeah, no, that's extra language we can
Okay.
delete.
And then in the next paragraph, it says a portion of this revenue collected may be subject to, do we know what that portion is going to be? Oh,
This is the
LDFA and TIFA.
the TIFA and LDFA. It says a portion,
So It's a disclosure
revenue
making
collected
sure that
may
a
be
portion of the
subject to
1 mil
capture.
would be subject to capture.
Do we know what that amount would be?
yeah, like what,
Depend on the project that we're tackling and if it's in the district and how much funds we're.
No, I think, Mickey, Joe, the question is, of that 1 millage, of that 1 mill levy, could we figure out what out of a 1 mill levy in the city is
want-
captured by the TIFA and the LDFA in a given year?
here,
Right. I think that's what's being asked. So,
well, because it specifically says in here, a portion of the revenue may be subject to capture. So I'm just trying to, figure out what that language means.
what state law requires, so the city has 2 types of tax increment authorities. There's a Local Developments Finance Authority, LDFA, and Tax Increment Finance Authority, TIFA, or as we sometimes call it, TIFA. Those authorities capture the growth on the taxable value for properties in their district. They capture the mills levied on that growth in assessed values. That's required by state law. That applies to all millages that are levied in those districts that are subject to capture. So even though this millage didn't exist when those authorities came into existence, it still would be captured as an after a rising millage unless the city and the authorities entered into an agreement to exempt the millage. You could enter into an agreement to exempt this millage from capture, in which case it wouldn't be. But you would need to give some real careful thought to that based on whether or not you're offering those kind of exemption agreements in other circumstances.
And again, to exempt, it would require the approval and authorization of the LDFA board and the TIFA board? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, it would be, for the TIFA capture, it would be an agreement between the TIFA board and the city council, and for the LDFA, it would be an agreement between the LDFA board and the city council.
Okay.
And that is something you can consider in the future, but we don't know at this point in time whether or not that's going to happen, which is why I used the language that I did, that it may be captured.
It may be, okay. Okay, that's all I have for now, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Tahar, any additional thoughts?
No, I support the 1 mil concept, and look forward to seeing the simplified language. I think it's really important to keep this very focused on the one thing we're trying to do, so it's very clear that we're not trying to slip other things in under the table or later. That's it.
Okay. Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, I support the 1 million for 5 years and simplifying
Okay, very good.
as possible.
Ms. Mitchell?
Ditto.
Okay, easy enough. Okay. You feel like you have consensus and will be able to prepare a revised draft for our consideration on Monday?
Yeah, I think we do.
Very good. Roger, we appreciate your work. I thought this was, and thank you to everyone who was able to attend. I thought this was a productive meeting. I will leave you with this. A couple weeks ago, obviously, I stated my opinion about putting a proposal on the ballot for 1 mil dedicated to streets for a 5-year period. I think that's important. Again, I think it would allow us to fund and finance some projects that would improve the quality of life in the community. I would add, not to belabor this point, but I would add again that the optics of this is very important. So on Monday, I am really adamant and I'm really hopeful that that this can be approved unanimously and that we can speak in one unified voice to our electorate, to our citizens, because I think that's going to go a long way in helping us sell this and convince people that it will be good for them and good for the city. So I offer that for your consideration. At this time, actually, we have a second public comment period. Do we not? Is that correct? Okay. So under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. And at this time, unless there's objection from the dais, I would entertain a motion to excuse the absences of both council members Gearbaugh and Seal.
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Tahar, seconded by Mitchell. All those in favor of excusing the absences signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. How about a motion to adjourn this special council meeting at 7:28 p.m.?
So moved.
Second.
Again by Tahar, and that was seconded by McClellan.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.